Officer James Wilson stands over Zoe Jackson's small body gun, still smoking. Her blood stains the playground asphalt. Suspected weapon lies beside her, a cell phone case. Judge Raymond Jackson watches from his car, screaming his daughter's name. Wilson smirks, unaware who just witnessed his crime. Before we dive deeper into this heartbreaking story of injustice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community fighting for justice. Now, are you ready to witness how a single moment of racial prejudice shattered a family's life and sparked a revolution against systemic racism? Let's continue. The morning had started like any other Tuesday for 10-year-old Zoe Jackson. She woke up excited about her day, carefully selecting her favorite yellow dress with sunflower patterns that her mother had bought her just last weekend. Zoe had always been a bright child, consistently earning top grades in her math club at Westfield Elementary. Her parents, Judge Raymond Jackson and Dr. Amara Jackson, had recently moved to the affluent suburb of Oakwood, seeking better educational opportunities for their daughter and a supposedly safer environment away from the city. The irony of this decision would haunt them forever. That afternoon, Zoe waited at Oakwood Park after her math club meeting ended early. She sat on a bench near the playground, her sparkly purple phone case clutched in her small hands, as she texted her father that she was ready to be picked up. Judge Jackson had responded immediately, telling her he was just 5 minutes away. The park was peaceful, with a few other children playing while their parents chatted nearby. None of them paid much attention to Officer James Wilson as he drove his patrol car slowly around the perimeter. Wilson had been with the Westfield Police Department for 15 years, amassing a concerning record of excessive force complaints, particularly against black suspects. These complaints had been systematically buried by his superiors and the police union. His fellow officers knew to look the other way when Wilson was in one of his moods, and today, after being reprimanded by a superior for a minor infraction, he was particularly agitated. He noticed Zoe sitting alone, a black child, in an overwhelmingly white neighborhood. Something about her presence there triggered an immediate suspicion in his mind. When he saw her reach into her backpack, his hand moved instinctively to his weapon. He did not announce himself as police. He did not ask her what she was doing. He did not give any warning whatsoever before drawing his gun and firing 3 shots toward the 10-year-old girl. The first bullet tore through her shoulder, spinning her small body around. The second grazed her temple, leaving a trail of blood down her face. The third missed, embedding itself in the wooden bench behind her. Children screamed. Parents grabbed their kids and ran. Zoe collapsed onto the ground, her yellow sunflower dress rapidly staining red. The sparkly purple phone case she had been so excited to show her father lay beside her on the asphalt. It was at this precise moment that Judge Raymond Jackson pulled into the parking lot just in time to witness the unthinkable. He saw the officer standing over his daughter, gun still drawn. He saw the blood pooling around her small body. He heard the screams of witnesses. Something primal broke inside him as he leaped from his car, screaming Zoe's name. Officer Wilson turned toward the sound, a smirk forming on his face, before recognition dawned. Judge Jackson was well known in legal circles across the state, his reputation for fairness and integrity making him both respected and feared in courtrooms. Wilson's expression changed from smugness to alarm, but he quickly composed himself, already formulating his defense. "She was reaching for what I thought was a weapon," he stated flatly, not even bothering to holster his gun or check on the bleeding child. Judge Jackson fell to his knees beside his daughter, frantically checking for a pulse while dialing 911 with shaking hands. "My daughter's been shot by a police officer at Oakwood Park," he shouted into the phone. "This is Federal Judge Raymond Jackson. I need an ambulance immediately." While he desperately tried to stop Zoe's bleeding with his suit jacket, Wilson made no move to help. Instead, the officer began instructing witnesses to clear the area, declaring it a crime scene. He made no effort to call for medical assistance himself, focusing instead on controlling the narrative by confiscating phones from witnesses who had recorded the incident. When Judge Jackson demanded to know why Wilson's body cam wasn't active, the officer muttered something about a malfunction. Later investigation would reveal it had been manually disabled just before the shooting. 5 excruciating minutes passed before sirens could be heard in the distance. Zoe's breathing had become shallow, her eyes unfocused as she drifted in and out of consciousness. "Daddy," she whispered, once her small hand clutching weakly at his sleeve. "Am I in trouble?" Those 4 words would haunt Judge Jackson for months to come. The EMTs arrived and immediately recognized the severity of Zoe's injuries. They worked quickly, stabilizing her as best they could before loading her into the ambulance. Judge Jackson insisted on riding with her, his once immaculate suit now soaked with his daughter's blood. As the ambulance doors closed, he saw Officer Wilson speaking casually with his arriving colleagues, gesturing dismissively toward the scene, as if describing nothing more consequential than a traffic stop. Judge Jackson made a silent vow in that moment, looking at his critically injured daughter. This would not be buried or explained away. He would use every ounce of his considerable power and influence to ensure that justice would be served. What he couldn't possibly know was how deep the corruption ran, or how many powerful people would fight to protect the system that had allowed this atrocity to happen. The ambulance screamed through the streets of Westfield, lights flashing as paramedics fought to keep Zoe stable. Judge Jackson held his daughter's small hand, whispering promises that everything would be all right, though uncertainty gnawed at his heart. When they arrived at Westfield Memorial Hospital, he expected immediate action for a critically injured child. Instead, they were met with suspicious glances and inexplicable delays. "We need information before treatment," insisted the intake administrator, Thomas Reed, a thin man with cold eyes who seemed more concerned with insurance verification than the bleeding 10-year-old on the stretcher. "Sir, this is Judge Raymond Jackson, and his daughter has been shot by a police officer," the paramedic explained impatiently. "She needs immediate surgery." Reed's expression didn't change as he pushed a clipboard of forms across the counter. "Protocol is protocol. We need these filled out completely." Judge Jackson, still in his blood-soaked suit, grabbed the forms while shouting for someone to help his daughter. "My insurance information is on file with your hospital. I've donated to your cardiology wing. Please, she's losing blood." After what seemed an eternity, Dr. Sarah Collins appeared, a blonde woman whose professional demeanor couldn't quite mask her discomfort with the situation. "What happened here?" she asked, directing the question to the police officer who had followed the ambulance rather than to Judge Jackson. "Potential gang-related incident at the park," the officer replied, repeating Wilson's fabricated narrative. Judge Jackson was stunned. "That's absolutely false. My daughter is 10 years old. She was waiting for me after her math club. Officer Wilson shot her without warning or provocation." Dr. Collins's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm sure there's an explanation, sir. We'll do what we can." Her tone suggested skepticism, as if Zoe must have done something to provoke the shooting. The medical team wheeled Zoe into an examination room, but their movements lacked urgency. Judge Jackson watched in growing horror as Dr. Collins performed only a cursory examination before ordering basic tests. "She needs a trauma specialist and surgery immediately," he insisted. "The bullet is still in her shoulder, and the head wound could cause swelling." Dr. Collins smiled thinly. "I assure you I'm qualified to assess the situation. Her injuries appear superficial." Judge Jackson couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Superficial? She's been shot twice. I want another doctor right now." "Unfortunately, we're short-staffed today," Reed interjected, having appeared at the doorway. "Dr. Collins is the only attending physician available." What neither man noticed was Nurse Melissa Parker, who had been silently monitoring Zoe's vitals. She slipped out of the room, pulling her phone from her pocket. In a supply closet down the hall, she made a call. "Dr. Williams? This is Melissa Parker from Westfield Memorial. We have a 10-year-old black girl with gunshot wounds being seriously neglected. Her father is Judge Jackson, but they're treating them like criminals." "Yes, that Judge Jackson. Please, we need you here now." Back in the examination room, Judge Jackson watched in growing alarm as Zoe's condition deteriorated. Her breathing became more labored, and the monitors showed her blood pressure dropping. "She needs pain medication and blood," he insisted, but Dr. Collins had ordered only saline. "We don't want to mask any symptoms," she explained dismissively, "and we need to be careful with narcotics." The implication was clear and deeply offensive. Just as Judge Jackson was about to explode with rage, the door opened, and Dr. Marcus Williams strode in. Tall, confident, and radiating authority, Dr. Williams was known throughout the state as one of the best trauma surgeons in the country. "I got a call about an emergency," he said, simply moving immediately to Zoe's side and checking her vitals. His expression darkened as he assessed her condition. "This child is in hypovolemic shock. Why hasn't a trauma protocol been initiated? Where's the blood transfusion? Why hasn't her shoulder wound been properly dressed?" Dr. Collins stammered, something about following procedure, but Dr. Williams was already issuing orders to the nurses. "Get her to OR2 immediately. Type and cross for 4 units. I want a CT of her head and shoulder before I cut. Move." The medical team responded to his authority, suddenly finding the urgency that had been lacking. As they prepared to move, Zoe, Dr. Williams, turned to Judge Jackson. "I'm getting her into surgery now. I'll do everything I can." For the first time since the nightmare began, Judge Jackson felt a flicker of hope. As Zoe was wheeled toward surgery, he collapsed into a waiting room chair, the adrenaline that had been sustaining him finally ebbing. Nurse Parker appeared with a cup of water and a clean scrub top. "Change out of that bloody suit, sir," she advised quietly. "I'll stay with you and keep you updated." Judge Jackson thanked her, then asked the question that had been bothering him. "How did Dr. Williams know to come?" Nurse Parker smiled tightly. "Let's just say some of us don't agree with how things are done around here." Hours passed in agonizing slowness. Judge Jackson made dozens of calls, first to his wife, who was at a medical conference in Boston and was now desperately trying to get a flight home, then to colleagues and friends who might help navigate the situation. What he discovered during these conversations left him cold. Hospital Administrator Reed had ordered staff to list Zoe in the system as an unidentified patient, despite knowing exactly who she was. This administrative maneuver effectively erased her identity and her connection to Judge Jackson, potentially allowing the hospital to make decisions without parental consent. When Judge Jackson confronted Reed about this discovery, the administrator's response was chilling in its bureaucratic indifference. "A clerical error, I'm sure. These things happen in emergency situations." Judge Jackson, no longer able to contain his fury, recorded the conversation on his phone. "This is not a clerical error. This is deliberate obstruction and endangerment of my daughter. I will hold this hospital accountable for every second of neglect." Reed's face hardened. "I'd advise against making threats, sir, and recording without consent is illegal in this state." He signaled to a security guard. "Please confiscate Judge Jackson's phone. It's against hospital policy." The guard approached, hand outstretched, but Judge Jackson stood his ground. "Touch me or my property, and I'll add assault to the civil rights violations I'm already documenting." The confrontation might have escalated further if not for the timely arrival of a local news crew in the hospital lobby. Someone had tipped them off about the shooting of a federal judge's daughter. Reed immediately retreated, not wanting a public scene. Outside the hospital, Police Chief Gerald Harris had arrived ostensibly to check on Zoe's condition, but actually to control the narrative. He approached Judge Jackson with practiced concern. "Judge, on behalf of the department, I want to express our deepest regrets about this unfortunate incident. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to an understanding that serves everyone's interests." The implication was clear, a settlement contingent on silence. Judge Jackson, a man who had spent his career upholding justice in courtrooms, felt as though he had stepped through the looking glass into a world where his daughter's life was just a negotiating point. "Chief Harris, the only understanding I'm interested in is seeing Officer Wilson arrested for attempting to murder my daughter. There will be no private discussions, no settlements, no burying of evidence. The world will know what happened today." Chief Harris's friendly expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "That's your right, of course, but consider carefully before you turn this personal tragedy into a media circus." These situations are always more complicated than they first appear. Before Judge Jackson could respond, Dr. Williams emerged from surgery still in his operating gown. His expression was grave but determined. "She's stable. The shoulder wound was complex, but we've removed the bullet and repaired the damage. The head injury caused some swelling, but the bullet didn't penetrate the skull. The next 24 hours will be critical." Judge Jackson sagged with relief. "Can I see her?" Dr. Williams nodded. "She's in recovery now. She'll be moved to pediatric ICU shortly. I've arranged for private security at her door at my own expense." He glanced meaningfully at Chief Harris as he said this. "I don't trust hospital security to be sufficient." The implications of this statement hung in the air, a silent acknowledgment of the forces already aligning against them. As Judge Jackson followed Dr. Williams to see his daughter, he was unaware that the battle for justice was just beginning, and that the system he had served faithfully for years was about to reveal its darkest aspects. The true extent of the corruption and racism embedded in Westfield's institutions would soon become apparent, testing his faith in the justice system to its very limits. The morning after the shooting, while Zoe lay unconscious in the pediatric ICU with tubes and monitors surrounding her small body, Westfield Police Department launched its damage control operation. Police Chief Gerald Harris stood before a forest of microphones in the department's briefing room, his expression solemn yet controlled. "Yesterday afternoon, one of our officers was involved in an unfortunate incident at Oakwood Park. Officer James Wilson, a 15-year veteran with an exemplary record, responded to reports of suspicious activity. Upon arrival, he encountered an individual who made sudden movements and appeared to reach for what he believed was a weapon. Fearing for his safety and that of civilians in the park, Officer Wilson discharged his weapon. Not once did Chief Harris mention that the individual was a 10-year-old girl or that the weapon was a purple phone case. Officer Wilson has been placed on administrative leave, which is standard procedure, while Internal Affairs conducts a thorough investigation. We ask the public to reserve judgment until all facts are known." The assembled reporters shouted questions, but Harris only acknowledged journalists known to be friendly to the department. When someone yelled out about the victim being Judge Jackson's daughter, Harris quickly wrapped up the press conference. "This is an ongoing investigation. We will provide updates as appropriate." Behind the scenes, the machinery of institutional protection was already in full motion. Internal Affairs. Captain Rebecca Morris had been assigned to lead the investigation, a choice that raised no eyebrows, except among officers who knew her history of clearing cops in shooting incidents. Her first action wasn't to interview witnesses or secure evidence, but to meet privately with Officer Wilson and representatives from the police union. The union had immediately provided Wilson with one of the city's most aggressive defense attorneys, Lawrence Bennett, known for his success in defeating police brutality claims. "Remember, you feared for your life," Bennett was overheard coaching Wilson. "Stick to that narrative regardless of what videos might show." Meanwhile, evidence began disappearing or transforming. Witness statements taken immediately after the shooting were altered in official reports. The statements of white witnesses who clearly saw Wilson shoot without provocation were minimized as unclear or contradictory, while the few statements supporting Wilson's version were highlighted. The most damning evidence, Wilson's body cam footage, remained officially corrupted. ITE specialist Ryan Martinez, who refused to falsify his technical report about the manual deactivation of the body cam, was suddenly transferred to night shift at the precinct across town. Judge Jackson, splitting his time between his daughter's bedside and gathering evidence, received an unexpected visitor at the hospital. Mayor Elizabeth Warner arrived with a bouquet of flowers and a photographer, her campaign smile firmly in place until the media was asked to leave. Once alone with Jackson, her demeanor changed dramatically. "Raymond, I've always respected your work on the bench," she began, her voice low and measured. "That's why I'm here as a friend to suggest you consider the bigger picture. This situation could become very messy for everyone involved." Judge Jackson stared at her in disbelief. "My daughter was shot by one of your officers for absolutely no reason. She's fighting for her life. What bigger picture should I be considering?" Mayor Warner sighed, as if disappointed by his naivety. "Your career, for one. Judges who make enemies of the police department find it difficult to function effectively. Cases get delayed, evidence gets misplaced, witnesses become unavailable." The threat was thinly veiled. "There's also your pending consideration for the federal appellate court. Such appointments require broad support, including from law enforcement." Judge Jackson felt cold fury rising within him. "Are you threatening to interfere with my judicial appointment if I pursue justice for my daughter?" Mayor Warner's smile never reached her eyes. "I'm simply pointing out political realities. Officer Wilson has a family too. His 20 years of service shouldn't be erased by one unfortunate mistake." A mistake. He shot a 10-year-old girl who was sitting on a bench. There was no threat, no crime, nothing but a black child existing in a space where he decided she didn't belong. Mayor Warner stood smoothing her immaculate suit. "I can see you're too emotional right now for a reasonable discussion. Think about what I've said, Raymond. There are always alternatives to public confrontation." After she left, Judge Jackson returned to his office to retrieve some files, only to find it had been searched. Files related to police brutality cases he had presided over were missing. His computer showed signs of unauthorized access. When he called courthouse security to report the break-in, he was told the security cameras for that floor had malfunctioned during the night. No investigation would be possible. His colleague, Judge Michael Peterson, one of the few who hadn't suddenly become unavailable, warned him over a secure phone line. "Ray, you need to understand what you're up against. There's a network connecting the mayor, the police chief, certain judges, and some very wealthy donors. They protect their own at all costs. I'm a federal judge, Michael. They can't just make me disappear. No, but they can destroy your reputation, block your career advancement, and make sure any case against Wilson falls apart. They've done it before." The extent of the corruption became even clearer when District Attorney Victor Reynolds held his own press conference announcing preliminary findings that classified the shooting as justified under department guidelines for threat assessment and response. Reynolds had made this determination without interviewing key witnesses, without waiting for Zoe's statement, and without reviewing any evidence beyond Wilson's own account. When reporters questioned the unusual speed of this preliminary finding, Reynolds cited clear evidence of perceived threat, without specifying what that evidence might be. Judge Jackson watched the press conference from Zoe's hospital room, a sick feeling growing in his stomach as he realized how quickly the system was closing ranks. Even more disturbing were reports from parents of Zoe's classmates who had witnessed the shooting. Police officers had questioned these children without parents or lawyers present, using leading questions and intimidation tactics to shape their recollections. 10-year-old Sophia Chen had been reduced to tears when an officer suggested she might be in trouble for lying if she maintained that Wilson had shot without warning. Judge Jackson's phone rang. It was Cameron Lee, a technology expert who had served as an expert witness in several of Jackson's cases. "Judge, someone tried to hack into your personal email and cloud storage last night. The attempt came from an IP address registered to the Westfield Municipal Network. Can you secure my accounts?" "Already done. I've also been monitoring social media and news sites. There's a coordinated campaign starting to paint you as anti-police based on cherry-picked rulings from your career. They're building a narrative that you're using this incident to pursue a personal vendetta." Judge Jackson thanked him, then sat heavily in the chair beside Zoe's bed. The system he had served faithfully for his entire career was now revealing its true nature. A machinery of self-preservation that would sacrifice a child's life and justice itself to maintain the status quo. He realized that to fight this, he would need to step outside the system and build his own case, his own network, his own power base. As he watched his daughter's chest rise and fall with the help of machines, Judge Jackson made a decision. He would use every resource call in every favor and leverage every connection to expose not just Wilson's crime, but the entire corrupt structure that enabled it. Do you think Judge Jackson should trust the legal system he's been part of for years, or build his own case outside the system? Comment number 1, if you believe he should work within the system he knows so well. Or number 2, if you think he needs to fight outside conventional channels. Like this video if you're outraged by how quickly institutions protect their own instead of seeking justice. Subscribe to follow Zoe's fight for justice through this corrupt system. Now, with powerful enemies aligning against them, how will Judge Jackson find allies brave enough to stand against this entrenched corruption? 3 days after the shooting, Zoe remained in critical but stable condition. Dr. Williams had performed 2 additional surgeries to repair damage to her shoulder, explaining to Judge Jackson that without intervention, she might never regain full use of her arm. The bullet that grazed her head had left a visible scar that would forever mark her, but the psychological scars would run much deeper. Judge Jackson had barely left her side sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair despite Dr. Williams offering him access to the doctor's lounge. He needed to be there when she woke up, needed her to see a familiar face in what would surely be a terrifying awakening. During brief moments when Zoe's mother took over the bedside vigil after flying in from her medical conference, Judge Jackson retreated to an empty waiting room that had become his makeshift command center. His first call was to Andre Washington, his former law school roommate who had become one of the nation's preeminent civil rights attorneys. "I need your help, Andre. The system is already closing ranks." Washington didn't hesitate. "I'm on the next flight. Don't talk to anyone official until I get there. Every word you say will be twisted." Within 24 hours, Washington had arrived with a team of attorneys and investigators, bringing with him connections to national media outlets that wouldn't be controlled by local influences. The story began spreading beyond Westfield's boundaries, catching the attention of prominent civil rights activists. Kiana Brown, a respected community organizer who had successfully challenged police departments in 3 major cities, reached out through Washington. "Judge Jackson, I can help mobilize community support and manage peaceful protests. The public pressure needs to be consistent, but disciplined." With her guidance, daily demonstrations began outside both the hospital and police headquarters. The protesters were diverse and focused their message: clear justice for Zoe, accountability for Wilson. No group was more dedicated than Zoe's classmates and their parents, who created heartbreaking signs featuring photos of Zoe in her math club, winning spelling bees and playing basketball. These images of a vibrant, talented child contrasted sharply with the department's attempts to dehumanize her. Inside the hospital, unexpected allies emerged. Nurse Melissa Parker, risking her job and possibly her nursing license, provided Judge Jackson with hospital surveillance footage showing the deliberate neglect Zoe had received before Dr. Williams arrived. "They do this all the time. she confided, different standards of care based on race. It's usually more subtle, but what they did to your daughter was criminal. Dr. Williams methodically documented every aspect of Zoe's medical treatment, creating duplicate records after discovering that portions of her official medical chart had been altered to minimize the severity of her injuries. They're building a narrative that the shooting wasn't as serious as we claimed. He explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. I've seen this before, but never so blatant. Judge Jackson's judicial colleagues, with few exceptions, maintained a conspicuous distance. Calls went unreturned. Expressions of support were vague and noncommittal. Judge Peterson explained the reality during a furtive meeting in the hospital cafeteria at 2 a.m. Most are afraid, Raymond. The mayor has influence over judicial appointments, budget allocations for the courts, and various perks judges have come to expect. Others genuinely believe in backing the police no matter what. The thin blue line mentality runs deep on the bench. One unexpected source of potential help came from the federal level. FBI agent Danielle Rodriguez contacted Washington to arrange a meeting with Judge Jackson. The Bureau has authorized a preliminary civil rights investigation, she explained in the hospital's chapel, one of the few places they could speak privately. There's been a pattern of similar incidents in Westfield that caught our attention even before your daughter was shot. Meanwhile, Officer Wilson had become a cause célèbre among right-wing media outlets. Placed on paid administrative leave, he gave exclusive interviews portraying himself as a dedicated officer being persecuted for doing his job. I saw a suspicious individual in a park known for drug activity, he claimed on National Liberty Network, despite Oakwood Park being in one of the safest, most affluent neighborhoods in the city. When this person made a sudden movement toward what I believed was a weapon, I relied on my training to neutralize the threat. Not once did the interviewer challenge Wilson's characterization of 10-year-old Zoe as a suspicious individual, or ask why a veteran officer couldn't distinguish between a phone case and a weapon. Through persistent research and confidential sources, Judge Jackson and Washington discovered that Wilson had been involved in 3 previous shootings of unarmed black children during his career. All had been classified as justified, the records sealed by judicial order. Using his legal connections, Jackson obtained copies of these sealed records, revealing a disturbing pattern that the department had systematically buried. Anonymous police officers, disgusted by the department's handling of the case, began providing information through secure channels established by Washington's team. They revealed a department culture that rewarded aggressive policing in minority communities while punishing officers who reported misconduct. One night, returning to his home to collect more clothes, Judge Jackson found his property vandalized. Racial slurs were spray-painted across his garage door, his car windows smashed, and a crude doll with Zoe's name hung in effigy from a tree in his yard. When he called the police, the responding officers took over an hour to arrive, then suggested the damage was probably done by typical juvenile delinquents rather than a hate crime. They took minimal notes and made it clear no real investigation would follow. Kiana Brown, hearing about the incident, organized a community watch program. Volunteers, many from Westfield's black churches and community organizations, began patrolling the Jackson neighborhood in shifts. They want to isolate you, she explained, make you feel vulnerable and alone. We won't let that happen. The district attorney, under pressure from various directions, convened a grand jury to consider charges against Wilson. What should have been a positive development was undermined when Washington's sources revealed that Reynolds had hand-selected jurors known to be pro-police, including the wife of a retired officer and the brother of the police union president. The corruption was so blatant that even Judge Jackson, who had seen many distortions of justice during his career, was shocked by the brazenness. They're not even pretending to follow proper procedure, he told Washington during a strategy session. It's like they're daring us to challenge them. That's because they've never been successfully challenged, Washington replied. The system in Westfield has operated this way for decades. Your daughter's case is just exposing what's always been there." As the resistance network grew stronger, Judge Jackson found himself in the unfamiliar position of being an outsider to the system he had served for so long. The experience was transformative, opening his eyes to realities that many in the black community had tried to tell him about for years. He had always believed in working within the system to change it. Now he was learning that sometimes the system itself was the problem. With Zoe still unconscious, fighting for recovery, the battle for justice continued to build momentum. The question remained whether it would be enough to overcome the entrenched power structures determined to protect their own at any cost. 2 weeks after the shooting, as Zoe showed signs of improvement and the movement for justice gained momentum, the systems of power in Westfield launched a coordinated counterattack. It began with hospital administrator Thomas Reed filing a formal complaint against Dr. Marcus Williams for unauthorized treatment and violation of hospital protocols. The complaint alleged that Dr. Williams had circumvented proper procedures by taking over Zoe's case without administrative approval and had demonstrated unprofessional conduct by criticizing the care provided before his arrival. The potential consequences were severe, potentially including suspension of hospital privileges or even review by the state medical board. Dr. Williams received the notice with grim resignation. "They've tried this before," he told Judge Jackson. "Last year I exposed discriminatory triage practices in the emergency department. They backed down when I threatened to take my evidence to federal regulators, but they've been looking for another opportunity." Beyond the hospital, Mayor Warner's administration found other ways to apply pressure. City funding for community programs in predominantly black neighborhoods was suddenly frozen, ostensibly for accounting reviews. These programs included after-school tutoring, job training, and health clinics that served thousands of Westfield's most vulnerable residents. When community leaders protested, they were told the reviews were routine but could take months to complete. The peaceful protests organized by Kiana Brown faced increasing police interference. Permits for demonstrations were denied on technicalities. When protesters gathered anyway, officers in riot gear appeared, creating an atmosphere of intimidation. Participants were photographed by plainclothes officers, and many reported being followed after leaving the protests. Arrests for minor infractions like blocking sidewalks or excessive noise began to mount, with those detained often held for the maximum time allowed before charges were filed. Judge Jackson himself became a target when the Judicial Conduct Committee, chaired by Judge Lawrence Hoffman, a close ally of Mayor Warner, announced an ethics investigation into his handling of previous cases involving police testimony. Jackson was temporarily removed from the bench pending the outcome of virtually unprecedented action given the flimsy ground cited. "They're trying to destroy your credibility," Washington explained during an emergency strategy session. "If they can paint you as biased against police, they can dismiss your advocacy for Zoe as personal vendetta rather than legitimate pursuit of justice." The media landscape shifted as well. Local outlets that had initially covered the shooting sympathetically began running stories questioning Jackson's objectivity, citing anonymous sources claiming he had a history of anti-police sentiment in his rulings. Cable news segments debated whether Jackson was exploiting a tragic accident for political purposes, often without even mentioning that the victim was his 10-year-old daughter. Most disturbing were the stories appearing in local papers suggesting that Zoe had a juvenile record and had been involved in gang-adjacent activities through older cousins. These completely fabricated claims were attributed to sources close to the investigation, and though later retracted in small print corrections, had already poisoned public perception. In the midst of this coordinated attack, Zoe finally regained consciousness. Her first words upon seeing her father were, "Am I in trouble, Daddy?" The question broke something in Judge Jackson, who had to step out of the room to compose himself. When he returned, Dr. Williams was gently explaining to Zoe what had happened and why she was in the hospital. The psychological evaluation that followed revealed the extent of the trauma. Zoe exhibited clear signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, flinching at loud noises, and becoming terrified when a uniformed security guard passed her door. She also suffered from partial memory loss surrounding the shooting itself, though Dr. Williams explained this was common with traumatic brain injuries and might improve with time. When investigators from Internal Affairs finally came to take Zoe's statement, Washington insisted on being present and recording the interview. Captain Morris's questioning was clearly designed to confuse and undermine Zoe's recollection. "Isn't it true that you made a sudden movement just before Officer Wilson fired?" she asked repeatedly, despite Zoe's consistent statement that she had simply been sitting on the bench texting her father. When Washington objected to the badgering, Morris became confrontational. "We're trying to establish facts, counselor. If your client is too traumatized to provide reliable testimony, we should note that in the record." The implication was clear. Zoe's statement would be dismissed as unreliable, allowing Wilson's version to stand unchallenged in official reports. School Superintendent Richard Davis added another layer of pressure when he contacted Dr. Amara Jackson, suggesting that perhaps Zoe's enrollment at Westfield Elementary should be reconsidered when she recovered. "Given the publicity surrounding the incident," he explained with false concern, "there might be disruptions that could affect Zoe's learning environment. Perhaps a different school would be more appropriate." The threat of educational displacement was particularly cruel, given Zoe's academic achievements and the importance of stability in her recovery process. Officer Wilson's wife, Lisa, began making regular appearances on sympathetic media outlets, giving tearful interviews about her husband's dedication to community safety and the toll the false accusations were taking on their family. "James has served this community for 20 years, she stated on a popular morning show. One split-second decision in the line of duty shouldn't erase that record. She never acknowledged that the split-second decision had nearly killed a child who posed no threat whatsoever. The pressure intensified when right-wing militias responding to calls on social media to stand with Officer Wilson began counter-protests. Armed men in tactical gear appeared at the edges of the Peaceful Justice for Zoe demonstrations, creating a volatile atmosphere that police seemed reluctant to address. Financial pressure came next. Judge Jackson discovered that his bank accounts had been frozen due to a routine audit triggered by suspicious activity. His credit cards were similarly affected, though he had sufficient resources through friends and family to weather this attack. The message was clear: every aspect of his life was vulnerable. FBI agent Rodriguez, who had been making progress in establishing a pattern of civil rights violations within the Westfield Police Department, was suddenly reassigned to a field office in Alaska. Her replacement informed Washington that the preliminary investigation was being downgraded due to resource allocation priorities. Dr. Williams faced the most direct threat when he received notice that the state medical board was reviewing his license based on complaints about his judgment and professional conduct. The timing made it obvious that this was retaliation for his role in Zoe's case, but the potential consequences were serious nonetheless. Through all these attacks, Judge Jackson maintained his focus on two priorities: Zoe's recovery and the pursuit of justice. He understood now that what he was fighting was not just one racist officer or even a corrupt police department, but an entire interlocking system designed to protect power and privilege at the expense of justice. His education continued when Cameron Lee, monitoring communications related to the case, discovered something truly shocking. Surveillance evidence of Mayor Warner Police Chief Harris and several judges, including Judge Hoffman, discussing ways to handle the Jackson problem during a supposedly social gathering at an exclusive country club. Lee couldn't access the actual audio, but the metadata and partial transcript were damning. "This goes beyond corruption," Washington said when presented with the evidence. "This is conspiracy. They're actively coordinating to obstruct justice and violate your civil rights." The realization of how deep the corruption ran was staggering, but it also provided an opportunity. If they could prove the conspiracy, they could potentially break the entire system wide open. But gathering that proof would be dangerous, and they were already facing the full force of Westfield's power structure. As Zoe began the long process of physical and psychological recovery, the battle lines were clearly drawn. On one side stood a system determined to protect itself at all costs. On the other, a growing coalition of determined individuals who believed that justice shouldn't depend on power, privilege, or race. The question remained, in a system so thoroughly corrupted, was justice even possible? The turning point came unexpectedly, exactly 1 month after the shooting. Zoe had been transferred to a rehabilitation facility specializing in trauma recovery. Her physical condition improved enough that Dr. Williams deemed it safe to move her from the hospital. The shoulder wound was healing well, though she would need months of physical therapy to regain full mobility. The psychological wounds were proving more stubborn, with nightmares and anxiety attacks still plaguing her. During a therapy session focused on empowerment through narrative control, Zoe's therapist suggested that recording her experience might help her process the trauma. With her parents' careful support, Zoe decided to make a video statement describing what had happened that day in the park. "My name is Zoe Jackson. I am 10 years old. I want to tell you what happened to me," she began, her voice small but determined. For 12 minutes, she recounted the events with the clarity that only a child can bring, describing how Officer Wilson had approached her without speaking, how she had been confused when he drew his weapon, how she had not understood what was happening, even as the bullets tore through her body. "I didn't do anything wrong," she concluded, tears streaming down her face. "I was just waiting for my daddy." The video was meant to be private therapeutic rather than public, but Nurse Parker, who had continued to support the family and was present during the recording, saw its potential power. "People need to hear this," she told Judge Jackson. "Not politicians or lawyers or activists, just Zoe telling her truth." After careful consideration and consultation with Zoe's therapist, Judge Jackson agreed to a limited release of the video to counter the dehumanizing narratives being spread about his daughter. Within hours of the video being posted on Washington's law firm website, it had been viewed millions of times. The unfiltered testimony of a 10-year-old child cut through the political noise, touching hearts across political and racial divides. Hashtags like Justice for Zoe and Believe Zoe began trending nationally. News programs played excerpts, forcing even reluctant outlets to acknowledge the humanity behind the statistics of police shootings. As public attention refocused on Zoe herself rather than the political battle surrounding her case, new witnesses came forward. Park maintenance worker Luis Ramirez provided clear footage of the shooting captured on his personal phone. He had been afraid to come forward earlier, his undocumented status making him vulnerable to threats from authorities. But Zoe's courage inspired his own. "That little girl is braver than me," he told Washington's team. "I cannot stay silent anymore." His video showed unequivocally that Wilson had fired without warning at a child who was simply sitting on a bench. Even more damaging to Wilson's defense, the footage captured his expression immediately after the shooting, not of shock or regret, but what could only be described as satisfaction. The most unexpected ally emerged from within the police department itself. Officer Sarah Jenkins Wilson's former partner contacted Washington through an encrypted channel. "I can't live with this anymore," she wrote. "James Wilson is a racist who has talked for years about cleaning up Westfield by keeping black people out of white neighborhoods. I have documentation of his comments, his patterns of harassment, and his history of excessive force." Jenkins agreed to testify in exchange for protection, as she feared retaliation from fellow officers. Her evidence included text messages in which Wilson boasted about intimidating black residents in white neighborhoods and discussed techniques for provoking reactions that would justify use of force. As these new pieces of evidence emerged, national civil rights leaders descended on Westfield, bringing with them media attention that couldn't be controlled by local influences. Reverend Marcus Johnson, whose organization had fought police brutality cases across the country, led a march of 10,000 people through downtown Westfield, ending at the steps of the police department where he delivered a powerful speech demanding accountability. "A child was shot for the crime of being black in America," he thundered. "If we cannot protect our children, what kind of nation have we become?" The pressure extended beyond Westfield. Congressional leaders announced hearings on patterns of police brutality and racial discrimination in law enforcement, using Zoe's case as a focal point. Senator Elaine Rodriguez, chair of the Judiciary Committee, specifically mentioned the disturbing pattern of civil rights violations in Westfield during a press conference announcing the hearings. The tide began to turn within Westfield's power structure as well. A junior IT specialist in the police department, troubled by what he was being asked to do, provided Washington with evidence that Police Chief Harris had instructed officers to delete text messages and emails related to the shooting. "I was told to wipe the servers and say it was routine maintenance," he explained. "I made copies of everything before I did it." Armed with mounting evidence, Judge Jackson filed federal civil rights charges against Wilson, the Westfield Police Department, and Westfield Memorial Hospital. The complaint detailed not just the shooting itself, but the subsequent cover-up attempts and pattern of discriminatory behavior. "This case is not just about justice for one child," Jackson stated at the press conference announcing the filing. "It's about dismantling a system that treats black lives as disposable." In the Department of Justice, unable to ignore the growing evidence and public pressure, announced a formal investigation into the Westfield Police Department's patterns and practices. This federal intervention represented a significant escalation, as it could potentially lead to court-enforced reforms and oversight. Mayor Warner, once so confident in her power, now faced recall petitions signed by thousands of Westfield residents. Business leaders, initially silent out of fear of political repercussions, began publicly questioning her leadership as the city's reputation suffered. Tourism declined, conventions canceled their bookings, and prospective businesses chose other locations, citing Westfield's unstable political climate. Within the hospital, whistleblowers emerged to support Dr. Williams, providing documentation of a long-standing pattern of different treatment standards based on race. Nurses, technicians, and even other doctors came forward with specific examples of discriminatory care, particularly in emergency situations where subjective judgments about pain levels and treatment priorities could have life or death consequences. The Judicial Ethics Committee, facing intense scrutiny for its obviously retaliatory investigation of Judge Jackson, abruptly closed its inquiry and reinstated him to the bench. The committee's statement referenced insufficient evidence of impropriety, a tacit admission that the charges had been baseless from the start. Meanwhile, public support for Zoe continued to grow. A national fund for her medical expenses raised millions of dollars in just days, with contributions coming from all 50 states and dozens of countries. Much of the excess would eventually go toward establishing a foundation supporting young victims of police violence. Under the weight of mounting evidence and public pressure, Officer Wilson began showing signs of stress. Witnesses reported seeing him drinking heavily at local bars, getting into arguments, and making threatening statements about Judge Jackson and others involved in the case. His attorney, Lawrence Bennett, struggled to control his client's increasingly erratic behavior, particularly after Wilson gave a disastrous interview in which he referred to Zoe as "that girl who shouldn't have been in our neighborhood anyway." The most surprising development came when Lisa Wilson contacted Judge Jackson, directly requesting a private meeting without attorneys present. "James isn't who I thought he was," she confessed during their carefully documented conversation. "I've defended him for years, made excuses for his anger, his prejudices, but I can't do it anymore." She provided damaging information about police department practices, including how officers were taught to justify shootings after the fact and how the department maintained unofficial quotas for stops and searches in minority neighborhoods. She also revealed that Wilson had manually disabled his body cam before approaching Zoe, a deliberate action that contradicted his claim of equipment malfunction. This revelation was confirmed when forensic analysis of the body cam, finally obtained through court order, showed it had been turned off manually just 2 minutes before the shooting. Do you believe the system would have ever held Officer Wilson accountable without Zoe's video testimony going viral? Comment number 1. If you think institutions protect their own, no matter what evidence exists, or number 2, if you believe the truth eventually prevails even in corrupt systems. Like this video if you're inspired by how one brave 10-year-old girl's testimony began changing an entire system. Subscribe to see how this landmark case progresses through the courts. With all this new evidence mounting, how will Officer Wilson's trial unfold, and will it expose even deeper corruption in Westfield? 6 months after the shooting, the trial of Officer James Wilson began. The intervening months had seen dramatic developments, perhaps none more significant than District Attorney Victor Reynolds recusing himself from the case after evidence surfaced of his extensive collaboration with the police department to bury misconduct complaints. Text messages obtained through subpoena revealed Reynolds had specifically instructed his staff to find a way to justify Wilson's actions before any investigation had even begun. In Reynolds's place, the governor appointed Special Prosecutor Alexandria Carter, a former civil rights attorney with a reputation for successfully prosecuting police misconduct cases. Her appointment sent shockwaves through Westfield's power structure, signaling that the usual playbook of delay, deny, and deflect would not work this time. The trial was moved to the federal courthouse to ensure impartiality, with Judge Elaine Watkins presiding. Security was unprecedented, with federal marshals searching everyone who entered the courtroom after threats were made against both the Jackson family and witnesses scheduled to testify against Wilson. Jury selection became its own battleground. Defense attorney Lawrence Bennett used peremptory challenges to exclude as many black potential jurors as possible until Prosecutor Carter successfully argued a Batson challenge forcing Bennett to provide race-neutral reasons for his strikes. After 2 tense weeks, a jury of 8 women and 4 men was seated with demographic representation roughly matching the county's population. The national media descended on Westfield, with legal analysts debating the case on every major network. The courthouse steps became a daily gathering place for supporters on both sides, though the Justice for Zoe contingent consistently outnumbered Wilson's supporters by significant margins. Opening statements set the tone for what would follow. Prosecutor Carter was methodical and devastating in her presentation. This case is not about a split-second decision made by an officer fearing for his life, she told the jury. The evidence will show that Officer Wilson deliberately approached a 10-year-old child without identifying himself as police, without giving any commands, and without observing any threatening behavior whatsoever before firing 3 shots at close range. The evidence will further show that after shooting Zoe Jackson, Officer Wilson made no attempt to render aid, showed no remorse, and immediately began constructing a false narrative to justify his actions. She outlined the extensive cover-up that followed the pattern of discriminatory policing in Westfield and Wilson's history of excessive force against black residents. This shooting did not happen in isolation, she concluded. It was the predictable result of a system that enabled and protected Officer Wilson through years of escalating behavior. Defense attorney Bennett, in contrast, presented Wilson as a dedicated officer making a difficult decision in a dangerous world. Police officers must make life or death judgments in fractions of seconds, he argued. Officer Wilson responded to what he perceived as a threat based on his training and experience. This is a tragedy, not a crime. Notably absent from his opening was any explanation for why Wilson perceived a 10-year-old girl with a phone as a threat, or why his body cam had been manually disabled just before the encounter. The prosecution's case built methodically over the following weeks. Medical experts detailed the severity of Zoe's injuries, explaining how the shoulder wound would cause permanent limitation of movement and how the head trauma had resulted in ongoing cognitive and emotional challenges. Dr. Williams testified about the substandard care Zoe had initially received and presented documentation of the hospital's pattern of treating black patients differently than white patients with similar conditions. Psychological experts discussed the PTSD Zoe now suffered, explaining how everyday activities like going to school or playing in a park now triggered panic attacks and flashbacks. This child will carry this trauma for the rest of her life, testified Dr. Rebecca Chen, a specialist in childhood trauma. Every developmental milestone will be affected by what happened to her. Police practices experts testified that Wilson had violated virtually every departmental policy regarding use of force escalation protocols and duty of care to injured persons. A firearms instructor from the police academy stated unequivocally that shooting a seated child holding a phone would never be justified under any training scenario. The defense attempted to call expert witnesses to counter this testimony, but their credibility crumbled under cross-examination when Carter revealed their histories of consistently testifying for officers accused of misconduct regardless of evidence. Several hospital staff members testified about the discriminatory treatment Zoe had received, describing the hospital's unofficial but widely understood practice of providing different standards of care based on race and perceived social status. Nurse Parker's testimony was particularly powerful as she detailed the specific ways Zoe's care had been compromised and how Hospital Administrator Reed had ordered staff to alter records. Perhaps the most damaging testimony came from officers within the Westfield Police Department itself. Officer Jenkins described Wilson's history of racist comments and excessive force, particularly in affluent neighborhoods where he frequently stopped and harassed black residents. He called it preventive policing, she testified. He said if they knew they weren't welcome, they wouldn't come back. Other officers granted immunity from prosecution described the department's practice of altering reports to justify use of force and the unofficial policy of targeting black residents in white neighborhoods for additional scrutiny. One by one, the pillars of Wilson's defense collapsed. The body cam footage recovered through advanced forensic techniques showed Wilson manually turning off the device before approaching Zoe. Park surveillance cameras initially claimed to be non-functional were revealed to have been working perfectly, their footage deliberately deleted, but later recovered from backup servers. Multiple civilian videos captured the shooting from different angles, all showing the same thing: a child sitting quietly on a bench, then suddenly being shot without warning or provocation. The most emotionally charged moment of the trial came when Zoe herself took the stand. Now 11 years old, wearing a blue dress with her hair in neat braids, she appeared both vulnerable and remarkably composed as she was sworn in. The courtroom fell completely silent as she began to speak. "I was sitting on the bench waiting for my dad," she testified in a clear voice that occasionally trembled but never broke. "I had texted him that math club ended early and he said he was on his way. I was playing a game on my phone when I saw someone coming toward me. I didn't know he was a police officer because he didn't say anything. Then I heard a loud noise and I felt this terrible pain in my shoulder. I fell off the bench and there was another loud noise and my head hurt really bad. I remember looking up and seeing him standing over me with his gun still pointed at me. He wasn't helping me. He looked happy." When asked if she had made any threatening movements or had anything that might have looked like a weapon, Zoe shook her head. "I just had my phone with the purple case I got that morning. It had sparkles on it." Several jurors visibly struggled to maintain composure during her testimony, and even Judge Watkins had to remove her glasses to wipe her eyes at one point. Wilson's defense team chose not to cross-examine Zoe extensively, recognizing the damage her testimony had done to their case. Their brief questioning focused only on whether her memory might have been affected by the trauma which Zoe acknowledged was possible, but maintained that her core recollection of being shot without warning remained clear. As the prosecution's case neared completion, they presented their most devastating evidence, Wilson's own words. Text messages recovered from his phone revealed messages to fellow officers about cleaning up certain neighborhoods by making black residents feel unwelcome. Body camera footage from previous incidents showed a pattern of aggressive and disrespectful behavior toward black citizens, contrasted with polite professional interactions with white citizens in similar situations. When Wilson finally took the stand in his own defense, his testimony did more harm than good. Under Bennett's direct examination, he stuck to the practiced narrative of perceiving a threat and responding according to training. But under Carter's skilled cross-examination, Wilson became defensive and combative. When pressed on why he perceived a seated 10-year-old girl as a threat, he claimed the park had a history of gang activity, a statement immediately disproven by crime statistics showing 0 gang-related incidents in the park's history. When questioned about turning off his body cam, Wilson claimed he couldn't remember doing so despite the forensic evidence. Most damaging was his response when Carter asked directly, "Mr. Wilson, do you regret shooting Zoe Jackson?" After a long pause, Wilson answered, "I regret the situation occurred," never actually expressing remorse for shooting a child. As Carter continued to press Wilson's facade, cracked further. "These people need to learn," he said, forgetting the careful coaching of his attorney. "They can't just come into neighborhoods where they don't belong and expect nothing to happen." The courtroom erupted at this statement, forcing Judge Watkins to call for order. Bennett's attempts to rehabilitate his client on redirect examination only made matters worse, as Wilson continued to refer to "these people" and justified his actions as maintaining community standards. The defense case collapsed further when their star expert witness, Dr. Gregory Palmer, was revealed to have falsified his credentials and published articles promoting debunked racial theories in fringe publications. Judge Watkins struck his entire testimony from the record and instructed the jury to disregard everything he had said. After 3 weeks of testimony, closing arguments finally began. Carter methodically reviewed the evidence connecting the dots between Wilson's documented racial animus, the shooting itself, and the extensive cover-up that followed. This case represents not just one officer's actions, but a system that enabled and protected him until it couldn't anymore, she told the jury. Today, you have the power to say that shooting a child because of the color of her skin is not acceptable in our society. Bennett's closing argument focused on the dangers police officers face and the split-second nature of their decisions, but his arguments felt hollow after the mountain of evidence presented. He ended by asking the jury to consider the chilling effect a guilty verdict would have on police officers trying to do their jobs, a plea that seemed to acknowledge the weakness of his actual defense. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, legal analysts predicted lengthy discussions given the complexity of the case and the multiple charges. Wilson faced attempted murder assault with a deadly weapon official, misconduct, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. To everyone's surprise, the jury returned after just 4 hours. The courtroom hushed as the foreman rose to read the verdict. On all counts, the jury found James Wilson guilty. The verdict sent shockwaves through Westfield and beyond. As Judge Simmons prepared to sentence Wilson, impact statements from both sides were presented to the court. Zoe, supported by her parents, delivered a statement that brought many in the courtroom to tears. "I used to dream about being a doctor like my mom," she said, her voice small but steady. "Now I have nightmares about being shot. I used to love going to the park. Now I'm scared to go outside sometimes. I used to trust police officers. Now I'm afraid when I see them. Officer Wilson didn't just hurt my body, he hurt my life. Dr. Amara Jackson spoke of the trauma of nearly losing her daughter and watching her suffer through surgeries, pain, and nightmares. Judge Jackson described how the shooting had forced him to confront the reality that his position and accomplishments offered no protection against racism, and how systems he had trusted throughout his career had revealed themselves to be fundamentally corrupted. Wilson's family also spoke his wife Lisa, describing their children's suffering due to threats and ostracism. She apologized directly to the Jackson family, acknowledging that nothing her family experienced compared to what Zoe had endured. Wilson himself declined to make a statement, maintaining the stony silence he had adopted since his damaging testimony. Before pronouncing sentence, Judge Simmons addressed the courtroom. "This case has exposed deep wounds in our community and our justice system," she stated. "The evidence presented shows not just a single criminal act, but a pattern of behavior enabled by institutional failures. Mr. Wilson, you violated the most sacred duty of your profession to protect the innocent. Instead, you brought violence to a child and showed no remorse for your actions." She sentenced Wilson to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, the maximum allowed under the charges. As Wilson was led away in handcuffs, the reverberations of the case continued to spread throughout Westfield. Police Chief Gerald Harris, already suspended pending investigation, resigned in disgrace when federal charges were filed against him for obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Mayor Elizabeth Warner, facing both a recall election and federal corruption charges, saw her political career end when voters overwhelmingly supported her removal from office. In a poetic turn of justice, Kiana Brown, who had organized the Justice for Zoe movement, was elected as Westfield's first black mayor on a platform of transparency, accountability, and community healing. Westfield Memorial Hospital faced its own reckoning. Administrator Thomas Reed was fired after an independent investigation confirmed systemic discrimination in patient care. The hospital paid substantial federal fines and agreed to court-supervised monitoring of treatment protocols and outcomes. Dr. Williams, vindicated after his professional ethics were questioned, was appointed chief of surgery with a mandate to implement comprehensive anti-bias training and equitable care standards. The ripple effects extended beyond individual consequences. Judge Jackson, having experienced firsthand the failures of the justice system, established the Zoe Jackson Justice Foundation, dedicated to providing legal representation for victims of police brutality and advocating for systemic reforms. The foundation quickly became a powerful force for change, supporting cases across the country and helping draft model legislation for police accountability. The Department of Justice investigation into the Westfield Police Department revealed pervasive problems beyond Wilson's case. Systematic racial profiling, excessive force falsification of reports, and retaliatory practices against officers who reported misconduct were all documented in the scathing 400-page report. The findings led to a consent decree requiring comprehensive reforms, including civilian oversight, mandatory body cameras with strict usage protocols, implicit bias, training, and new use of force guidelines. Nurse Parker, whose courage in coming forward had been instrumental in exposing the hospital's discriminatory practices, was promoted to Director of Patient Advocacy, a newly created position responsible for ensuring equitable treatment for all patients, regardless of race or socioeconomic status. For Zoe herself, recovery remained a complex journey. Physical therapy helped her regain much of her shoulder mobility, though certain movements would always be limited. The psychological healing proved more challenging, with therapy being an ongoing part of her life. Yet remarkably, she began transforming her trauma into purpose, speaking to youth groups about resilience, and becoming an unexpected voice for change. The Jackson family received a record settlement from the city police department and hospital, most of which went into a trust for Zoe's future and to fund the foundation's work. They chose to remain in Westfield rather than flee the painful memories, determined to see the reforms through and ensure that the changes sparked by their tragedy would be lasting ones. Judge Jackson himself faced a new chapter in his professional life when he was nominated for a position on the federal appellate court. His experience as both a judge and a victim of injustice gave him a unique perspective that even former critics acknowledged would bring valuable insight to the bench. 6 months after Wilson began serving his sentence, news broke that he had been attacked in prison, suffering injuries that required hospitalization. The incident created an ethical dilemma for the Jackson family. "Violence isn't justice," Judge Jackson told reporters when asked for comment. "We sought accountability through the legal system precisely because we believe in justice, not vengeance. Officer Wilson deserves to serve his sentence safely, just as every incarcerated person does." This principled stance, maintaining commitment to justice, even for the man who had nearly killed his daughter, earned Judge Jackson respect across political divides. Perhaps the most significant legacy of the case came when Senator Rodriguez introduced federal legislation titled Zoe's Law, establishing national standards for police use of force, creating robust accountability mechanisms, and providing funding for community-based alternatives to traditional policing. The bill gained bipartisan support, with even law enforcement organizations acknowledging that clear standards and accountability would ultimately benefit ethical officers. As the one-year anniversary of the shooting approached, Westfield had transformed in ways few could have imagined. The police department, under new leadership committed to community policing principles, was slowly rebuilding trust with residents. The hospital had become a model for equitable healthcare delivery. The municipal government, led by Mayor Brown, operated with unprecedented transparency and citizen involvement. None of these changes erased what had happened to Zoe Jackson, but they ensured that her suffering had created a legacy of positive transformation. During a private moment at home, Judge Jackson found Zoe looking at old photographs of herself before the shooting. "Do you think I'll ever feel normal again, Dad?" she asked, touching the visible scar on her temple. "Not the same kind of normal," he answered honestly. "But maybe something stronger. You've changed this city, Zoe. You've probably saved other children from going through what you did. That's an extraordinary thing." Zoe considered this, then nodded slowly. "I think I want to be a lawyer like you," she said. "Or maybe a judge. Someone who makes sure the rules are fair for everybody." Judge Jackson embraced his daughter, marveling at her resilience and wisdom beyond her years. The path forward would not be easy, but together they had already transformed a tragedy into a powerful force for justice. 6 months after Wilson's sentencing, life had established a new rhythm for the Jackson family. Zoe, now 12, had returned to school full-time, though at a different campus where she wouldn't have to revisit the location of her trauma daily. She still attended therapy twice weekly, but her nightmares had decreased in frequency, and she had begun participating in a youth leadership program focused on social justice. The program culminated in a national conference where young activists shared their experiences and visions for change. Zoe had been invited as a keynote speaker, her journey from victim to advocate making her an inspiration to others. The day after her powerful speech, which received a standing ovation from hundreds of young activists, Judge Jackson received a package at his chambers. There was no return address, and the postal markings showed it had been sent from another state. Inside was a sealed envelope and a flash drive with a simple note, "For Judge Jackson's eyes only. The truth goes deeper than you know." After having the package screened for hazards, Jackson viewed the contents privately. What he discovered left him shaken to his core. The flash drive contained internal emails, text messages, and recorded conversations between Mayor Warner Police Chief Harris and District Attorney Reynolds dating back 3 years. The documents revealed a shocking conspiracy. Zoe's shooting hadn't been a random act of racism by a rogue officer. It had been a deliberate attempt to intimidate Judge Jackson. For the past year before the shooting, Jackson had unknowingly been investigating cases that threatened to expose a massive corruption network operating within Westfield's government. A real estate development scheme had involved bribing officials to rezone area's condemned properties through questionable means and funnel contracts to connected companies. The conspiracy included the mayor, police chief, district attorney, and several judges who approved the necessary legal actions without scrutiny. Judge Jackson had been assigned several cases challenging aspects of these developments, and though he didn't realize it, his rigorous examination of evidence and refusal to rubber-stamp decisions had been causing panic among the conspirators. The documents showed Mayor Warner and Chief Harris discussing the need to send Jackson a message weeks before the shooting. Wilson had been selected because of his known racial animus and history of excessive force, making his actions seem like an extension of his established pattern rather than a directed hit. The plan had been to intimidate Jackson by demonstrating that his family could be targeted, with Wilson instructed to create a threatening presence in Jackson's neighborhood. Wilson, however, had gone far beyond intimidation when he encountered Zoe alone in the park. The documentation included a panicked conversation between Harris and Warner immediately after the shooting. This wasn't supposed to happen, Harris had said. Wilson was just supposed to scare them, make them feel watched. Not this. Warner's response was chilling. "It's done now. We contain this. If Jackson pushes, we destroy him. If he backs off, maybe the girl's accident becomes a rallying cry for reforms we control. Either way, we survive." The conspiracy extended beyond Westfield. The documents implicated officials in neighboring jurisdictions, state-level politicians, and even federal agencies. The real estate developments were connected to money laundering operations for organized crime, with millions of dollars flowing through seemingly legitimate businesses. Wilson, now facing a lengthy prison sentence, had finally confessed the entire scheme to federal investigators in exchange for protection. His statement included in the package detailed meetings where he was instructed to create a presence in Judge Jackson's neighborhood, but claimed he had misunderstood the instructions. Whether this was true or an attempt to mitigate his own culpability remained unclear. Judge Jackson sat in his chambers for hours reviewing the evidence repeatedly. This revelation changed everything. What had appeared to be a horrible crime born of racial hatred enabled by systemic corruption was actually something even more sinister, a deliberate attack on the justice system itself, with his daughter as collateral damage in a scheme to protect powerful criminals. The question now was what to do with this information. Exposing everything would re-traumatize Zoe, forcing her to confront the fact that she hadn't just been a random victim of racism, but had been specifically targeted because of her father's position. It would mean new investigations, trials, media attention, and the reopening of wounds that had just begun to heal. Yet burying the evidence would mean allowing many of the conspirators to escape justice. While some, like Warner Harris and Wilson, had faced consequences, others remained in positions of power, continuing their corrupt activities. Before Judge Jackson could decide, the choice was partially taken from him. Zoe, now more perceptive after her experiences, had noticed his distraction and troubled expression at dinner. Later that evening, she overheard a phone conversation between her father in Washington discussing the documents. Rather than being destroyed by this new information, Zoe displayed remarkable strength. "They tried to hurt you by hurting me," she said when she confronted her father with what she had learned. "That means it wasn't just about me being black. It was about you doing your job right." Judge Jackson was amazed by her insight and resilience. "Yes, but that doesn't make it any less wrong or painful for you." Zoe considered this, then said something that would guide their path forward. "If they did this to us, they probably did things to other families too. We have to stop them, Dad. All of them." Together, they made the decision to pursue complete justice regardless of the personal cost. The evidence was turned over to federal prosecutors, resulting in RICO charges against all involved in the conspiracy. The investigation expanded to multiple cities and eventually implicated dozens of officials, business leaders, and criminal organizations. The corruption had been so extensive that the initial revelations were just the tip of the iceberg. 1 year later, Zoe stood before a congressional committee considering permanent reforms to prevent such abuses of power. Now 13, her poise and articulate testimony left a profound impression on legislators and the public watching the televised hearings. "What happened to me was terrible," she testified. "But what made it possible was a system where people with power believed they could act without consequences. No child should be shot because they're black. And no child should be shot because powerful people want to send a message." Judge Jackson watched from the gallery, overwhelmed with pride, as his daughter's powerful words helped ensure passage of the most comprehensive police and judicial reform legislation in the nation's history. The laws created independent oversight mechanisms for police departments, courts, and prosecutors' offices, with robust protections for whistleblowers and severe penalties for official corruption. The final scene of their journey together came on a crisp autumn day, 2 years after the shooting. Zoe, now 14 and thriving, despite the permanent physical and emotional scars she carried, led a march of thousands through downtown Westfield. The occasion was the dedication of a new police accountability monument on the very spot in Oakwood Park where she had been shot. The monument featured a blindfolded Lady Justice, with her scales balanced by the words equality and accountability. Judge Jackson walked beside his daughter, marveling at how her trauma had been transformed into purpose. The road had not been easy. There had been setbacks, painful revelations, and moments of despair. But there had also been healing justice and profound change. As Zoe stepped to the microphone to address the gathered crowd, Judge Jackson reflected on the extraordinary journey from that terrible day to this moment of triumph. His daughter, once nearly destroyed by hatred and corruption, now stood as a powerful force for transformation. Her voice, clear and confident, rang out across the park. 2 years ago, on this spot, someone tried to silence me forever. Today I stand here stronger than ever, and I promise you this: as long as I have breath, I will speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. I will fight for a world where justice truly is blind to color, but sees clearly the difference between right and wrong. This is not the end of our journey. It's just the beginning. What's your take on this powerful story? Do you believe that individual courage like Zoe's can truly transform corrupt systems? Or do you think systemic change requires more than just powerful personal testimonies? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share to help spread awareness about the ongoing fight for justice and equality. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one family's fight to transform tragedy into lasting change. Remember, in the words of young Zoe Jackson, this is not the end, but just the beginning. This powerful story illustrates how deeply racism can be embedded within our institutions. Zoe's shooting wasn't just about one officer's prejudice, but revealed how entire systems, police, healthcare, government, and courts, can coordinate to protect power rather than serve justice. It demonstrates how quickly the establishment closes ranks when threatened, using media manipulation, evidence tampering, and intimidation against even the most privileged Black Americans. The narrative shows that justice requires extraordinary persistence and coalition building. No single person, not even a federal judge, could overcome systemic corruption alone. Victory came through diverse allies uniting against injustice, from medical professionals to technology experts to community organizers. Perhaps most importantly, it highlights the transformative power of authentic testimony. When Zoe simply told her truth, she cut through political barriers and touched hearts across divides in ways complex legal arguments couldn't. Her voice catalyzed a movement that legal strategies alone couldn't mobilize. Finally, this story teaches us about converting trauma into purpose. Instead of being defined by victimhood, Zoe transformed her suffering into powerful advocacy, creating meaning from tragedy and ensuring her pain produced positive change for others. True healing came not just from punishment, but from reforming the systems that enabled such injustice in the first place. What's your take on this powerful story? Do you believe that individual courage like Zoe's can truly transform corrupt systems? Or do you think systemic change requires more than just powerful personal testimonies? Have you witnessed racial injustice in your community? What would you have done in Judge Jackson's position when facing such coordinated opposition? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story moved you, please like this video to help it reach more viewers who need to understand these realities. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose injustice and celebrate those fighting for change. Share this video with someone who might gain perspective from walking in Zoe's shoes for a moment. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one family's fight to transform tragedy into lasting change. Together we can build a world where no child faces violence because of the color of their skin.